So for today's topic, I wanted to step back a little bit back to April. Back in April, we issued our second Life Sciences Investment Capital Report, focused on seed capital, IPO capital, Series A, other investment capital that's made into the sector as companies are getting started. Luckily for the state of Indiana, we've seen significant growth in investment capital invested in companies in the city, but that also put us in a position of stepping back and saying, there are other kinds of capital invested, not investment capital, but capital invested in the life science sector here in the state of Indiana. And so we decided to take a look at Central Indiana's invested capital in the healthcare and life sciences sector. And that's what we're here to talk to you about today. This is really the first time we've stepped back and looked at something that, for all intents and purposes, we often take for granted. And certainly without these investments prior to COVID hitting and accelerating and continue to accelerating through the state, we were not in a position to really understand just how important this sector is, not just to our economy, but to our well-being. So on August 23rd, we issued a report entitled Essential, the Impact of the Healthcare and Life Sciences Sector in Central Indiana. And you will see that posted into the chat later today so that you'll have a direct link to take a look at it. But instrumental in bringing that research to us was Techonomy. And so I'd like to bridge to our first speaker today and introduce a dear friend and partner of BioCrossroads, Simon Tripp, who is the Principal and Senior Director at Techonomy Partners. Simon, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Good morning, everybody. So in terms of the project purpose, there's really sort of multifold purpose for the study. One was certainly to define what we mean by the healthcare and life sciences sector up front and what we were talking about in terms of the region for Central Indiana. And what is the ecosystem that supports the healthcare and life sciences sector. We wanted to measure the economic impact of the sector and put that into perspective, provide an accounting of the functional impacts, because clearly healthcare doesn't exist just to create an economic impact, it exists to improve the lives of people. So we wanted to discuss the multifaceted functional benefits provided. And then dive into also of how has this ecosystem served Central Indiana well during the COVID response. So it's performed by our firm, Techonomy Partners. I think we had a number of advantages for us working on this project. We had recently completed a project for Pfizer looking at called Response and Resilience, which takes a deep dive into lessons learned around the planet from 13 different major life sciences ecosystems under COVID-19. We'd also been looking at the future of healthcare and life sciences, having just released a report for the American Society of Human Genetics on the economic impact of human genetics. That report was just cited in Science by Francis Collins and Dr. Lander, President Biden's science advisor. And then we do a lot of work for pharma and for bio, looking at the comparisons between states in life sciences areas. And then we also, of course, brought to the project a lot of experience working in Indiana with BioCrossroads and CICP, looking across life sciences sectors as well as other sectors of the economy. So in terms of thinking about the sector, we really defined it as three principal components: healthcare, the biomedical life sciences industry, and academic life sciences research and education. In terms of looking at total employment, we used 14 counties to define the region. So Central Indiana and ensuring, of course, that Purdue University's home and IU in Bloomington too are incorporated within those 14 county areas. Combined, it's a lot of jobs, 164,000 jobs created, a large number of those, of course, in the provision of healthcare, clinical care, a large life sciences industry, a base of 28,000 jobs, and almost 6,000 jobs in healthcare and life sciences within the academic ecosystem in Central Indiana. So I mentioned that we wanted to look at functional impacts. What are the benefits that are provided by having this three-part system of healthcare, life sciences industry, and academic life sciences? And we actually identified 23 main areas radiating out from those main areas. And those really impact four main domains of functional impacts. There's clearly the clinical healthcare domain provided through hospital outpatient care, inpatient care, the offices of physicians, the diagnostic labs, the urgent care facilities, and nursing homes across the region. That also relates to the innovation and economic development ecosystem for the region. The clinical side obviously helps with clinical trials and clinical innovations, but then you have a large base of industry that's producing therapeutics, diagnostics, vaccines, medical devices, very diverse in central Indiana. In fact, Indiana is one of the very few states in the country that's diverse across therapeutics, diagnostics, and medical devices, as well as medical equipment wholesalers. There's also the education and human capital realm, where many functional impacts are being generated, clearly in terms of the education of physicians at the University of Indiana University, and allied health professionals at other institutions, and then the education and training of skilled life scientists from the bachelor's degree all the way through to advanced PhD and postgraduate and fellowship studies. And then the fourth domain that we identified is really the societal well-being and regional quality of life aspects that are provided by having this really robust ecosystem in central Indiana. And I think COVID, of course, has highlighted the very central role that having this ecosystem plays in regional resiliency, in public health, and in ensuring that the community health and wellness of the region. So I mentioned that we did analysis, quantitative analysis in the report using input-output analysis to measure what's the economic impact of having this holistic ecosystem within the region. We defined the sector to include the biomedical industry, biomedical distribution, R&D, the hospitals and health sector, and the key components that go into that, and of course the academic medicine space. What we find is a really large-scale economic impact being generated. Over 331,000 total jobs in the region that are generated because of the expenditures and operations of this ecosystem, with total compensation of almost $26 billion to those employees. Over $84 billion in total economic output supported, and $7.4 billion in tax revenues being generated. I think one of the key takeaways too is the fact that the jobs being supported by this ecosystem are, high-paying, family-sustaining wage jobs of almost $100,000 when you add in wages and benefits, so health insurance and other benefits in the total compensation package. So very strong impacts. I think when we look at economic impacts, we're dealing with very large numbers when we look at a sector such as this, and it helps to put it into context. So we've done that analysis within the report. So when we talk about the direct jobs in the sector, which were 164,000 jobs, how does that compare, for example, to another very important sector for central Indiana, the manufacturing industry, with Indiana being one of the most intensive, if not the most intensive manufacturing state in the country? Well, it's more jobs than there is in manufacturing. Obviously, there's overlap there, accounted for in that green box across the bottom, because Lilly and Roche and other Cook and other leading companies, obviously manufacturers themselves, are included in both. But overall, the health and life sciences sector is larger than manufacturing in terms of employment on the region. We also looked at the number of other broad regional industries that are also important and signatures for the region, sectors such as finance and insurance, retail, transportation and logistics. And again, you can see that in context, healthcare and life sciences is the leading employer across these important sectors of the economy. We also looked at regional contribution to regional GDP, or gross state product. which is really a value being added in the economy by each individual sector. And again, we were quite surprised by this actually, but I think it's because manufacturing is included in our healthcare and life sciences area, that healthcare and life sciences direct effects, even on a value added on gross state product basis, is even larger than manufacturing in terms of its impact. But both of those have a very large impact upon Central Indiana's gross state product. So overall, what sort of share does this make of the total economy? Well, there's two bars here, the green and the blue bar. The green bar is the direct effect on the economy, how many people are actually employed in the healthcare and life sciences sector. The blue bar is the total impact, the multiplier effect of the expenditures emanating from those direct impacts. And you can see that overall, 21% of employment in Central Indiana depends on the operations of the healthcare and life sciences sector. It's 26% of total labor income in the region, and even more, 28.9% of total value added. Clearly at almost 30% of value added in the economy, we can see that this really is a signature industry for Central Indiana, carrying great importance and weight for the region. As Patty mentioned, these impacts aren't sort of created by serendipity, that they emanate from having a very complete ecosystem. And for this project, we benefited from having just done a deep dive into what is the structure of a holistic life sciences and healthcare ecosystem for Pfizer in the international study we did on the effects of COVID. So we use that same structure for looking at the ecosystem in Central Indiana. So across the top here is sort of the core activities of an ecosystem in terms of basic R&D, applied R&D, preclinical testing on into clinical trials, and in manufacturing and sales and distribution, all the activities that go into producing research and producing products that are then deployed in the clinical ecosystem. There's also a whole series of cross-cutting supports that are very important to have in place within the region. One of those, of course, this is an industry that's driven by skilled human capital. So the production and the attraction of skilled talent to meet the needs of that ecosystem is critically important. Second is the cross-cutting area of capital. It's expensive to do life sciences research. It's expensive to deliver high-quality clinical health care. And as scientific areas, these are constantly advancing, and you're upgrading and improving those facilities. So access to capital is very important to stay on the leading edge in life sciences. And then it's the most highly regulated industry of all. So public policy and regulation at a local level, at a state level, and of course at a federal level plays an extremely important role. And so paying attention to policies and regulations and how they're going to impact your ecosystem today and into the future is very important. So when we look across that ecosystem, what do we see in Central Indiana? Well, one, it is extremely complete. There's really not any significant gaps that we could identify in the healthcare and life sciences ecosystem operating within Central Indiana. On the R&D front, very intensive R&D, $604 million in federal R&D coming in, largely to obviously the academic research institutions in the region, funding healthcare and life sciences research. And the IU School of Medicine has been a real superstar in terms of growing its funding since 2015, 95% growth in NIH funding. And of course, the federal government now is putting more money into science and technology. So I would expect to see that grow further, given the success of IU in growing that research. The largest performer of research, of course, is industry. And we estimate that about $8.6 billion in commercial healthcare and life sciences R&D spending occurred in Central Indiana by the life sciences industry in 2020. Clinical products have to be advanced through clinical trials, as we all know, given the vaccines that we're benefiting from now under COVID. Central Indiana is a big participant in clinical trials. In fact, we found you're doing about twice the amount of clinical trials activity in Central Indiana as we would expect to see given national normative levels. Manufacturing, as we've talked about, extremely important in the region. 18.3% of regional manufacturing employment is in this sector. And then also, because of your central location, from a distribution perspective, biomedical distribution is an important component of your ecosystem, with over 4,000 people employed in distributing biosciences products. On the talent side, really good output of skilled human capital to serve the needs of the sector. We identified over 1,600 graduates coming from regional institutions in biological sciences and biomedical sciences. And then on the healthcare and clinical side, a lot more graduates still, of course, with over 10,000 graduates in 2020 with an associate's degree or higher produced to serve the needs of the ecosystem. IU is the largest medical school in the United States in terms of its student enrollment. So you're certainly punching considerably above your weight in terms of the output of physicians through your academic medical center. And then, as we noted, very large scale employment being generated overall with 164,000 direct jobs. In capital, we benefited from the fact that BioCrossroads had recently done a deep dive into venture capital and SBIR funding coming in to the region. Pretty good performance there in 2020, 26 awards with 21 companies in life sciences. And venture capital raised $262 million in central Indiana in the life sciences sector in 2020. Really strong base of public companies, of course, with a large-scale market cap of almost 300 billion in central Indiana. And as Patty mentioned, big investment taking place in terms of capital investment in new facilities and infrastructure. So to build on that a little bit more, this is not an ecosystem that was built overnight. It's the result of very long-term sustained strategic investment by the state, by the region, and by outside public and private investors. If we look at just in the 5-year period, so we had data for 2019 through to the end of 2023 in terms of announced projects, so a 5-year period. There's almost 3 million square feet of construction taking place in the sector over that time period, and over 2.3 billion being spent, about half of that being spent by the industrial life sciences sector. So what you're seeing is an average of 455 million in construction and capital expenditures taking place in the region per year on average over that 5-year period. So significant impact on construction jobs and all the activities that go with that investment. As you might expect, if that sort of investment is taking place, there must be growth taking place within the ecosystem, and we can see that to be the case. Another CICP initiative, Ascend, BioCrossroads sister organization, recently did a study looking from 2019 through to 2029, projecting employment across all the sectors of the central Indiana economy. And we could see in that data the amount that was anticipated to occur in terms of healthcare and life sciences related jobs. And so we applied that to our total economic impact numbers. And that results in a projection that over the next decade, it's likely that you'll see 27,000 jobs added to this sector. So significant additional employment being generated. To meet that employment demand, you can meet some of it, of course, by importing people to your region, being an attractive environment to people coming in from outside. But you also got to educate new people to enter that ecosystem and retrain people for that ecosystem. You benefit in central Indiana from having a really robust group of higher education institutions. And it really is a mix because there's very diverse jobs across the healthcare and life sciences ecosystem. So Purdue University Global is a strong contributor, as is Ivy Tech. Those two are equal in terms of the total number of people at an associate's degree or higher being generated through those institutions. IUPUI plays a very strong role with its health sciences education, and in the case of the IU School of Medicine, they actually show up under IUPUI's numbers in these data that are derived from federal government reporting. then Purdue and IU in Bloomington, and then the other regional institutions together combining for significant employment too at University of Indianapolis, Marion, and Butler. So very good output of students overall, if you, of course, you can retain them within the region for their employment. I mentioned in our introduction that we also wanted to look at, okay, what did this ecosystem mean in terms of when a really challenging resiliency event occurred? And of course, we've all been living through the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we also had the benefit of looking at how other places have performed in the work that we did for Pfizer around the world, and Central Indiana performed well. I think what was particularly impressive is how regional stakeholders across the public sector, industry, healthcare, the academic community, you all came together to collaborate to address this crisis. Central Indiana benefits from having this robust ecosystem. It also benefits from having established through BioCrossroads sort of a meeting ground or a connective tissue, so to speak, for the region, where you guys were already communicating with each other. The leadership knew each other, and that worked really well. With CICP organizing a series of weekly video conference meetings with participants from across this ecosystem, coordinating the approach. It was an impressive activity by the entire ecosystem pulling together. So my colleague, Ryan Helwig, during the project, really concentrated on looking at the response to COVID. And we ended up dividing the efforts of the ecosystem into 6 main areas that we could see of impact being generated. Clearly, there's the research activity that took place into the virus and into the public health impacts of the virus. The CTSI, the Indiana Clinical Translational Sciences Institute, was involved, Indiana University, IU School of Medicine, Purdue University on the academic side. And of course, the industry was really diving in, Eli Lilly and other leading companies in the region, with Lilly, of course, resulting in a therapeutic product as well. The data, information, and public health tracking. You have probably one of the most robust public health information exchanges in the country, and you have the Regenstrief Institute, a number of players and areas of expertise that were brought to bear, working and informing and looking county to county to inform the mitigation effects that you put into place. Diagnostics was a superstar effort by many players. On the private sector side, Covance, LabCorp, and then Eli Lilly making available resources. A number of your life sciences companies and resources at the universities in areas such as veterinary medicine and agricultural research, they had resources in PCR and other technologies that they were able to come together and pivot even those resources to benefit human medicine in terms of diagnostics. The development of therapies and treatments with Eli Lilly and Vasetti and AIT Bioscience engaged in that activity. And then we all know early on in the pandemic just the criticality of personal protective equipment and respiratory therapy equipment. And Cook Medical and Helmer and Pulmodine and others very quickly pivoted into driving production to meet the demands of those technologies. And then pulling together in terms of ecosystem support and guidance and funding, and your foundation community was involved, BioCrossroads and CICP, of course, and the Indiana Health Industry Forum and your Manufacturers Association. Lots of organizations collaborating, talking, and it was a really laudable effort put in place that made a real difference. While we have a very robust life sciences ecosystem in Central Indiana, and there's ongoing investment taking place, we live in a time of great change. And that change is both in terms of sort of business changes and public policy changes and demographic changes, but also great scientific and technological changes. And then these represent both threats and opportunities. I think given the characteristics of the Indiana life sciences ecosystem, you're more on the opportunity side than you are on the threat side. You're good in a number of these areas and making investments in a number of these sort of disruptive technologies that will highly impact the healthcare and life sciences ecosystem moving forward. Things in terms of genomics and gene editing, for example, and the capabilities that provides in personalized medicine. In terms of regenerative medicine and stem cell biology and synthetic biology, these are advanced areas that are certainly going to have a robust impact on life sciences moving forward. And the combination there with data analytics. One of the key forces of change is the convergence of life sciences and data sciences and computer science together across the research ecosystem and right through manufacturing with Manufacturing 4.0 and the digital supply chain and digital clinical trials. We recently did a research report for BioCrossroads looking at Indiana and artificial intelligence and advanced analytics, and we're really pleasantly surprised by the really strong capabilities that exist. Purdue University, for example, doing a really good job in terms of advanced analytics and using it as a cross-cutting area of training for all students across campus. You're really on the leading edge in a number of these areas. And as I mentioned, these other trends, I think research funding is trending favorably under the current administration. STEM education has to be paid attention to. We're still, as a country, not directing enough students into STEM disciplines to meet demand. Demographics and health equity. I think one of the good aspects of health and life sciences in general is that it provides a real good diversity of jobs. There's a lot of urban jobs, and so the demographics tend to be good, particularly within the clinical health sector. And then we have to pay attention to international competition as well. So my last slide in terms of conclusions, clearly this sector is a powerful economic engine for the region. A lot of jobs, a lot of value added, high paying jobs, and a lot of economic output being generated. It's also growing and likely to add thousands of jobs over the next decade. It's well rounded. You're not dependent on any one individual sector within life sciences, for example. And you have opportunities across a range of areas where there's convergence taking place. It's making large scale investments and betting on the future in central Indiana, and it's very collaborative. It is a sector that's facing opportunities and changes, and you'll need to pay attention to that moving forward as a region. And I think it's important to communicate to stakeholders the real power and promise of this sector for central Indiana. So with that, I'll thank you for your time, and I will turn back over to Patty. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. We really appreciate the partnership that we have with Techonomy and the importance of these findings. We'd like to turn now to our panelists. I'm very excited to introduce a group of folks to share their perspectives on the findings of this report. First, I'd like to start with Dave Roberts. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at Indiana Economic Development Corporation. Dave, we are very happy to have you here. And many of us are very focused on the life science and healthcare sector. Your perspective is the health of the entire state. So I'm really curious if you could share a little bit about the perspective from the state and the IDC on these findings and how you think they're going to benefit what you're doing to promote and grow the state of Indiana. Morning, Dave.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Patty. And hi to everyone. Thanks for letting me participate and being such a great partner to the IEDC, to the state. I think you said it well that, at times folks that are really close to an industry obviously are very passionate about it, and it almost becomes intuitive how important a particular industry is to the overall health and economic impact of the state, and we want to see it grow. If we zoom out just a little bit, at the IEDC, we're really focused on growing strong jobs for Hoosiers, right? And we know that comes from strong businesses, whether those are businesses that have been here for over 100 years like Lilly, or whether those are startup companies coming out of technologies that are being developed at Indiana University or Purdue University or any of the other fine institutions we have here in the state. or attracting companies from outside the state to come and be a part of our ecosystem. I was glad to be with Brian Stemme from your team, albeit virtually yesterday, with a company that we're trying to attract from even outside of the United States to call Indiana home. And as we look at what strong jobs mean, we have a new Secretary of Commerce, Brad Chambers, that's been in the role for about a month and a half, 2 months now. And he's really redoubled our emphasis on economies of the future. And so thinking about those jobs that are strong, that are resilient, that will persevere over the next 2, 3, 4 decades, but also, not just jobs that can bring dignity, because all jobs will bring some level of dignity, but those jobs that are going to pay above county wages, above state wages, above national wages, so that we're improving the overall health well-being of the individuals that are in those jobs to begin with. And candidly, coming back to your question now, I can't think of a stronger and better sector than the life sciences and healthcare in Indiana. So as we look at this report, I mean, it kind of, I don't want to say it confirms our bias. It really just kind of, it tells us what I think we suspected, and that's this. It's an incredibly strong sector, that the wages are well above average, that the overall economic impact is incredibly significant. I mean, we're looking at a combined economic impact of $84 billion. We've got the report, I think, also outlines $2.2 billion of planned capital expenditures. And we all know then that not only is that providing a job for someone at the end of that building project, it's providing jobs throughout the entire construction project itself, for folks that will not be involved in the business go forward, but are having, building great skills in terms of building advanced manufacturing, clean room environments, potentially, a bunch of important jobs that are sort of on the periphery and supporting the core jobs in the life sciences and healthcare. And I think when you look also at Indiana's strength in manufacturing, the other statistic that I thought was really important is that 22,000 life sciences manufacturing jobs in central Indiana represents 18% of our entire manufacturing employment. So when we talk about Indiana being a strong manufacturing state, it's not just sort of the things that you would imagine in your mind's eye from the 1930s and 40s. It's really, modern cutting edge manufacturing. And ultimately, when we look at those wages, I think the last statistic I saw was that we're looking at an average wage in the high 80,000s range. As you compare that and contrast that with the state average wages, state average wages are somewhere in the 47 to 50-ish thousand range. So a significant 60% increase over roughly, over those state wages. These are the kind of jobs that we want here in Indiana. And I guess the last thing I would say is that, the life sciences and healthcare sector has really been different in Indiana than in other places because of the diversity of players that we have across the entire spectrum when we talk about life sciences, when we talk about healthcare. And so that has an impact on how we talk about clustering. Clustering is incredibly important. You've got to have some sort of baseline in order to continue to attract those new companies or keep those young companies here in the state. But when you get a concentration, maybe in any one particular aspect, what can happen is you end up having folks competing head to head a little bit too much, and it drives up those wages so that beyond a healthy status where folks maybe are inclined to jump back and forth, and it chills the interest from new market participants. But I think we have it in a Goldilocks situation right now, just right. Plenty of strengths so that we can continue to compete on new project opportunities, but not so focused in any one particular area that we end up creating a hyper-competitive situation, which may feel good in the short term for the employees, but is long-term maybe not a sustainable way to grow. So I guess I just sum it up by saying this report is fantastic. It really helps underscore how important the life sciences are, not just to the sector itself, but to the ancillary topics of manufacturing and logistics, which are generally important to the state, and overall that this is an economy of the future that we need to lean into and encourage. I appreciate how Simon put it. More and more of our citizens go into the STEMs, into the STEM sector, the STEM disciplines, and ultimately choose life sciences for a career.
Thanks, Dave. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and we'll have some interaction here shortly with the other panelists. But it is important for us to know that the state understands the importance of the sector, because it's but for life sciences and healthcare, I think we would be in a different place. So thank you so very much. Of course, I'm biased, but this data supports my bias, which is always helpful. So our next panelist is Dr. Ryan Nagy. He's the president of the IU Health Adult Academic Health Center. He is responsible for very much of the $1.6 billion investment that IU Health is planning on making. Dr. Nagy, welcome. We're anxious to hear a little bit more about you and what you're up to and your reaction to the report.
Well, thank you, Patty. And on behalf of the 35,000 team members at IU Health, it's a pleasure to be with you. So I am a Hoosier. I was educated all the way through Indiana University. I'm a proud faculty member of the School of Medicine as an anesthesiologist, and currently I'm the president of the Adult Academic Health Center, which comprises Methodist and university hospitals. And to put that in perspective for everybody, IU Health is made up of about 16 hospitals across the state, and roughly about a little over 100,000 admissions. About a third of those occur at Methodist and university hospitals. And within those admissions, about 14,000 are from transfers from other hospitals, meaning we service a little over 100 hospitals across the state and beyond our borders, which make this not just a resource for Indiana, but even our surrounding states. And I give these statistics, and I'll react to this report in a way that's in one of humility and responsibility. So as the president and the one accountable for the #1 hospital in this state, ranked by US News, as well as the one that treats the vast majority, the largest number of patients, and then with our very vital and successful partnership with the School of Medicine, we train the vast number of physician nurses that populate this state. It's an immense responsibility, not just on myself, but the entire organization, to make sure we are educating and producing the next generation of caregivers, leaders in this space, and fulfilling our commitment to making Indiana one of the healthiest states. As it relates to aspects of the project, I'll get into that a little bit later. But again, this report clearly shows the impact of not just life science and healthcare in the community directly, but also indirectly. The number of jobs and lives that are impacted positively by the role we play in our community is vital. And again, I look forward to chatting more on the panel and especially on the project. But on behalf of IU Health and all those we serve, this report further confirms that we are well positioned in this central Indiana as well as the state to provide very high value care and a promising future for all of the Hoosiers in this state. So thank you, Patty.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Nagy. From my office, I view Riley Children's Hospital, and on any given day, I will see a Lifeline helicopter coming in anywhere from a half a dozen to a dozen times a day. And it reminds me of the very important work that you all do and all of the hospital systems across central Indiana and the whole state. So thank you so very much, and we're so excited to hear more. All right, our next panelist is Anne Hathaway. She is the Executive Director of the Indiana Medical Device Manufacturers Council. Anne, we're delighted to have you. I think that Simon made the point that while our medicines and devices are invented here, they have to be manufactured here, or luckily, many of them are manufactured here. And you have a specific perspective from that group. So welcome, and let's hear a little bit from you.
Thanks, Patty. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the report. The report actually shows what we know instinctively, that the industry, the life sciences industry, is dynamic and thriving, and specifically the med device industry is dynamic and thriving. And while we are focused today on central Indiana, the med device industry is truly a statewide industry, whether we think about it in terms of the corridor between Warsaw and Fort Wayne, with regard to Spencer, the Bloomington area, Batesville. I can point to every corner of the state where we have international companies, national companies. We still have entrepreneurs working to develop. And the life science industry in Indiana, the community, really has come together to focus on research, product development, testing and trials, production, distribution. I don't think enough people are aware that Indiana is the 5th largest med device manufacturing state in the country, which is just huge. And we're generating employment, economic output, exports, we're adding to our tax base. As Dave mentioned, the job, the employment numbers, the salaries really allow us the opportunity to continue to develop our state broad-based. Our employees are huge community partners. They work to develop their communities, to create better education opportunities, to spend more money in retail. It's just truly a network of opportunity to continue to grow. We are excited about the potential, not only in Indiana, to continue to grow. Dave mentioned that they were talking to an international company yesterday who's interested in coming to Indiana. We believe that we'll continue to attract as we continue to grow both our individual companies, looking out to partner, to work together. We're excited about projects that Roche is developing, Fort Wayne Metals, and excited about the collaboration that Cook Medical is doing on the eastern side of Indianapolis, taking a brownfield and actually focusing on eliminating poverty in a community by building up the community, creating jobs, bringing in food source, education opportunities focused on transportation, truly rebuilding a community. There's just so many opportunities as we continue to look at the data and to think forward about how we'll continue to evolve and change that will allow the med device industry to grow in Indiana. And we're excited about the future. I think it's so much fun and it's so exciting to have all of us together, working together to continue to figure out how we do this better. We're not without our challenges. While we bring these new jobs, we do compete with each other for employees, but we're also working together to solve how to not steal from each other, but to attract more at all skill levels. And there's a huge focus on attraction, training, retention, and I think that Indiana's on the tip of the spear to hopefully be the leader for the nation with regard to trying to solve this problem and bring new employees to our community. Thanks for the opportunity to participate today. I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Ann. And all right, I'm going to bring it around to our final panelist, Nora Doherty. She is the Executive Vice President of Strategy for us here at BioCrossroads, as well as the Managing Director of our seed funds. Nora, you were behind the scenes and in the thick of it through the preparation of this report. So bring us home. What are the major takeaways?
Sure. So first off, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. Simon and his team, including Ryan Hellwig and Marty Gruber that worked on this report, but also our own team, Ryan Stemme and Lori Leroy as well, and putting this together and have them to, especially Lori and Ed, for putting together sort of the summary graphic about the overall importance. We've heard this morning, the biggest number there, the $84 billion in total economic impact, how our healthcare and life sciences sector, how powerful an economic engine it is for the region, how it's growing, how important that it's well-rounded and connected. We've got down there in the bottom left-hand corner showing how significant the employment is and the output. And we talk about the relative size with manufacturing. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand is how interconnected this all is. You know, because we have such a strong life sciences and healthcare system, it really benefits and allows for our engagement and connectivity with our manufacturing sector, but not just our manufacturing sector, but with our distribution, transportation, and logistics sector, with our technology sector, with our finance sector, and even with our tourism and hotel industry. Because you have such a strong anchoring sector, it really impacts the others. When you have a highly regulated environment like this, when you have to build an infrastructure that's able to handle products, care, and services that are really around life and death decisions, they're built at a level of reliability that can only support our excellent other sectors. And I think that's really something that comes through and was a nice connection through this report. Again, on the right side, we've heard about, and we'll hear more about, the impact of these investments around our building products and construction products, because this investment goes well beyond traditional research and development. It's in every part of our economy. And that's why for every dollar spent in healthcare and life sciences, it generates another 48 cents of spending. And so I'm really excited about this, was been able to show, and I'm really excited about living in a state that depends on and is a leader in and is supported by this life sciences and healthcare sector. So thanks, Patty.
Thanks, Nora, and thanks to all of the panelists. We are going to bring everyone together today for the panel discussion. Simon, I'm hoping you're planning on joining us as well, to those that I just introduced. And so I'd really appreciate it. For those of you who are participating, we'd love to have some questions come forward. We'll be monitoring those as we go through the panel. So let's go ahead and get to it. So Dr. Nagy, I'm going to start with you. I really am curious about IU Health's vision for this adult health campus. You shared a little bit, but tell us a little bit more. It's a significant investment, announced to be about a $1.6 billion investment. And why are you excited about it? Why should we join you in that excitement?
Thank you, Patty, for that question. I'll start first with the genesis of the project. So the campuses are separated by about 1.5 miles. And just logistically and operationally, running 2 campuses where you're performing tertiary quaternary care at the highest level with significant barriers to entry. Just for the financial folks in the crowd, that is extremely expensive, and both campuses are currently very old, or the majority of the campuses are very old. When I compare this medical center to many across the country, we have one of the highest ages of plant, which continually requires a significant investment. Just like anybody in the crowd that may own an older home that you're doing some remodeling, just imagine that times about 1,000. And I'll give you a number on that. If we decided not to go forward with this project, at a minimum, it would cost me about $500 million over the next 10 years just to keep it as it is, which is not the state of care that we envision for our patients, our providers, and also to create an environment for innovation. Again, a key part of this campus is our partnership with IU School of Medicine, and they are in lockstep with us in making this an academic medical center campus that creates an environment where we not just treat patients and provide high quality service and a great patient experience, but one in which we push the boundaries of healthcare and ask the questions that others just cannot, because they don't have the resources and the people to make that happen. So at the heart of this project, it's not a building, it's a care model redesign. And I would expect many in this audience to ask me a question on, how does this bend the cost curve? Why in the world are you going to now go spend close to another couple billion on construction? And we know how all those numbers work. There's still plenty of additional funding that is required to outfit the building, to put all those programs. It's a significant investment. It's the largest in the history of IU Health. And it's one that competes with the top projects in this country. And I have been tasked by the board and the CEO of this company, Dennis Murphy, and Dr. Michelle Janney, who I report to, that this must be a transformative project, and therefore we must push ourselves. We are breaking a few rules. Form will force some function on this project. If we just build another hospital, we're going to get the same thing we have right now, which is still great care, but people expect more. Our society expects more, and even though this report demonstrates the economic impact, myself and every leader at IU Health believes that we must bend the cost curve, and we must do it. Granted, we're not alone in that, but we must take action to make that happen. So I'll give you some components of the project, and then I'll also give you some more tangible details. So for example, we're going to treat more patients, but I'm not going to just use the beds in a hospital. I'm going to use your bed at your home. So when I get a question from my faculty and staff that are worried about the downsizing of the size, under no circumstances are we going to create a situation where patients will not be able to find care. We have plenty of backup plans, and that's also why we chose this site. We control over 100 acres of this site. The project will be a little bit north of 40 acres, and we have plenty of infrastructure for plans B and C. But the goal is on plan A, and just like when they reach the new world, sometimes you need to burn the ships in order to motivate, and that's what we're going to do. We have the balance sheet and the will, and the most important thing, the people to make that happen. As far as when the project begins, it's already started. So if you were to drive around 16th and Capitol right now, you'll see a fair amount of what is called enabling utilities work. That's fancy speak for we've got to reroute some extremely large utility lines and sewer lines in order to make a giant hole for a building that's roughly going to be about 2 city blocks long, 1 wide, and 14 stories tall. So a little bit close to 2 million square feet. And the goal is to place a very, very flexible and adaptive platform, because quite frankly, as smart as we all think we are, those that are 10, 20 years from now, they'll know better on how to run that hospital and what to do with that hospital than we will right now. So we will build a very flexible platform, one in which we collaborate across department and divisional lines and place the resources of outpatient and inpatient care in one facility. And for anybody that's ever invested in, run, or been involved with a hospital, it's an extremely dense building. It's not just square footage, it's per square foot. It's one of the most dense and most complicated structures, quite frankly, in the world. So you have to use each component very efficiently. So I'll give you just one more example. Radiology. You always want to be on the cutting edge, particularly in an academic medical center, and imaging and diagnostics, which are proving to be even more valuable in disease detection, but also disease prevention. But they're expensive, very expensive. So how do you gain better utilization? Well, instead of having 2 at your outpatient center and at your inpatient center, I'm going to have very highly utilized 1 that both can use, and it's very, very convenient for our patients and staff to get around. You'll see much more work in the first quarter of 2022. The first patient is scheduled for 2026, and COVID has reinforced our principles and assumptions on this project, and COVID has not changed the budget, our goal, and our drive to make this not just a building, but one in which it leads and changes the care model for our patients and for our community. And just to give you a jobs number, when this is at its peak as far as the building project, we'll spend a couple years with at least an additional 2,000 people on this site. And we have very, very lofty goals with our project, with significant local participation, north of 50%, and diverse participation of at least 30%. So we are committing to very, very audacious goals because, as I said in my opening comments, this is not a time for where this is not about us bragging about size or the ability to do this. This is humility, and it's our responsibility to put this and do it right because it's for the next 70, 100 years. So I appreciate the question, Patty.
All right, well, thank you very much. And for those of you who haven't come down to 16 Tech and the Innovation Center, which is between 10th Street and 16th Street off of Indiana, please come down and visit. And we are in the neighborhood of IU Health's facilities and right next door to the School of Medicine at IUPUI. A lot's happening down here, so please come down and take a look and get the vision for where we're headed with this particular innovation district here in Central Indiana. I'm going to turn now to Ann. Ann, the manufacturing device sector is critical to the state of Indiana. It's spread out across the state of Indiana. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's going on and what expected growth? What could we be excited about in that sector? It's
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, first off, what we have to remember about the med device companies and the manufacturers is that every single day they're designing and manufacturing products that improve the quality of lives and save lives. And we're doing this throughout the state. And we're continually trying to work together to solve problems and to be innovative. And what's truly exciting is this collaboration that we've developed in the state of Indiana to work together, to communicate, to do these clinical trials. We're excited about what's happening at IU, and we're excited with regard to what the IEDC is doing to continue to attract companies. You know, for those of you who drive north in Indianapolis, who've watched the Abbott building going up, it's very exciting with having them there. As Dave and I have both mentioned, there are companies continuously coming to Indiana who are interested in the opportunity to move here. There are just so many international opportunities that are continuing to develop, and there are local opportunities. When I look back to COVID and the ability for our companies to work together to create PPE, specifically, we were able to create hand sanitizer, and we were able to provide that to some of our local hospitals. And so the ability for this industry to work at both the international level as well as the local level, continuing to build our communities, to attract more industry to the state. We just continue to grow the med device and the life science industry in a way that is attracting more every single day, and truly attracting more employees, more Hoosiers, that will continue to make our state vital and critical. We are a beacon in the Midwest, and we are not to be overlooked.
Thanks, Ann. You brought up the COVID response, and I think it's one of the things that working through that really difficult time, we were delighted to help facilitate a partnership between Lilly and Cook and Covance and Roche. Covance is now called LabCorp Development, as well as the State Department of Health and the Marion County and other counties and universities. The collaboration that went on there, for those of you who would not have had visibility to it, really demonstrated the strength of what we really benefit from here, which is the sense of community. And I think that we are unique in that. We could ask Simon his perspective on that in just a minute, but that collaboration and that local level is really demonstrated in helping, the health of Hoosiers. So, so with that, I'm going to go back over to Dave Roberts. Dave, you're helping us sell this place, right? I can't sell Girl Scout cookies, but I can sell the state of Indiana in the life science sector. But how do you do it? What can you share about how you're focused on recruiting companies here? What incentives are they looking for? What are the barriers that you're hearing about now? Because a part of what we want to do with this call is make sure that people are aware and can help resolve some of the barriers that we have or amplify the things that are strengths. So how can we help you?
Well, I can make this, excuse me, hold on one second. I can make it really short and just tell you there's two things, talent and energy cost, and that's about it. And then we could wind this down and hand it off. But the slightly longer response is there's not a major opportunity to attract or grow business in the state of Indiana that isn't concerned about the talent pipeline and isn't concerned about their overall cost of doing business. We have an excellent overall economic environment here and a very, very low cost of doing business, but power costs over the course of the last 2 decades have increased. We also see life sciences manufacturing requiring more power than it did in the past. And so that's an interesting shift. We think about some maybe traditional manufacturers using a lot of energy, but really life sciences, given the controlled environment, requires some significant energy as well. I think the strongest suit that we have in Indiana is actually the rich relationships, though, that we enjoy. And this is not just pandering because you're such a great host to this panel, but really it is BioCrossroads that helps connect a lot of this industry within Indiana, and then takes that next order of relationship to the groups outside of Indiana that then creates such a warm introduction. Patty, you've invited me to a panel in the past, and I've confessed that like the last time I took anything related to life sciences was Bio 1 in high school. So this is not my strong suit in terms of the technology itself. It's interesting to me. I enjoy it. I'm still wondering where my diet pill that takes off 25 pounds is that I was looking for. But other than that, I really lean on the subject matter experts, and that's you and your team. And so having a strong partner like that is really what distinguishes us from the other 49 states in a lot of ways. So I hope that helps. Those are the challenges that we have. Those are the strengths that we have. I think I talked about before that the diversity amongst the healthcare and life sciences companies that we have here is an incredible strength. The talent pipeline that's coming out of IU, in particular, IU Medical is fantastic. But across the board, at our other great institutions that are leaning into STEM, we graduate over 20,000 STEM students here in Indiana across all of our universities. We really just need to create as attractive an environment for them to stay and grow their career here as possible.
All right, thank you. And I need to give a shout out to Brian Stemme, who some of you would know, but Brian is our point person between BioCrossroads and the IEDC, and you've been keeping him busy. I think he's been keeping you busy, and that's what we like to hear. But food for thought, couple things I will just quickly mention. The report that Simon's team put together, we're pursuing broadening that out and doing similar studies for several other regions across the state of Indiana so that we can demonstrate the same waterfall effect and have some facts to operate when we're out in Warsaw or Fort Wayne or down in Bloomington, Evansville. So stay tuned for that. But when it comes to talent, I want to give a pitch to everyone that's on this call. This really is an issue. We can't overpromise and underdeliver when we recruit companies here. So I don't know what everyone on this call does, but each of us in some way are connected with our schools, connected with our employers, and identifying those needs is really critical, because the last thing we need to do is get someone here and have them disappointed because we can't help them with their talent pipeline. So in addition to talent, of course, capital, we've been talking a lot about capital. I'm going to pivot over to Nora. Nora, there's a lot of energy and a lot of ink given to venture capital and IPOs, now SPACs. And so, you know, that's the sexy kind of capital for some people. But the hard-earned capital is what we've been talking about today. So you've talked a little bit about how it impacts other sections, but give us your perspective on why this is so important in addition to the investment capital we often talk about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of it is it's all important. Right?
Yeah.
It's not an either or, it's it's a both and, or it's a all, because it really is about having a healthy ecosystem. Earlier this year, when we talked about the amount of money that venture capital puts into life sciences, I think the number last year was better than $250 million. We work really closely with our universities and our companies on that, and it is a lot of hard work. Elevate Ventures, I think if I can just put out a report on the first half of venture activity for this year. Team Goody there is the chief investment officer there, and we've blown past those numbers for last year. Terry Willey at IU running their venture program, Brian Ritchie at Notre Dame, Wade Lang and Brooke Beyer at Purdue. I mean, there's so many people involved in it, and it was really hard work. And I think that number being $250 million plus just in life sciences last year, we've already hit that. But just to put that in perspective, the numbers that we're talking about, when we talk about healthcare and life sciences, there's $26 billion in wages. We're talking about the amount of construction projects, 500 million a year in major capital projects. And I think it is sort of that order of magnitude difference. But I think what's important and what's really interesting is that all of those investments that are made in these life sciences companies as startups are coming from these technologies are really enabled because of this infrastructure that's been built, and that these investments that have been made over the long term, right? I mean, it's sort of like when you build your house and the neighborhood and everything that's in it. All those connections have to be made in order to have the opportunity to have innovation come together. Our research universities have over $500 million of research budgets every year. I think IU's was over 700 million, in Purdue around 600 million last year. And so when we're talking about those numbers, I think it really is about the scale. So it really is a both and. It's talking about scale, and that those infrastructure investments enable everything else to happen.
Yeah. So I have to go ahead and just put out another plug for a report that we issued last year that Nora led the development of, and it was taking a look at university tech transfer processes. I'm going to go ahead and have the team post the link to that report here. The importance of our university tech transfer offices is it's absolutely critical. We really want to bring more science out of our universities and commercialize it. And that takes patience, a lot of patience. And those guys do a yeoman's job of trying to make sure that we get the inventions out of the universities and onto the street. So familiarize yourself with those folks. They're doing a bang up job. Simon, I'm going to bring it back around to you. I'm hoping some folks will add additional questions here to the chat. And then I'm going to spring surprise questions on some of you guys based on the conversations we just had. But Simon, you have a perspective from across the US, right? And I think many of us say, all right, we understand this is what's happening in Indiana, but so what? How really do we compare? You mentioned that earlier, but I think it's worth revisiting because I think we need to be, excited about where we're advancing, and we're we're doing a great job and a little careful to identify those things where we really need to pick up the pace.
Yeah. I think before I address that question, I will say to Dr. Nagy that I absolutely sympathize with dealing with old infrastructure. I'm in an old farmhouse in New Hampshire at the moment that was built prior to the American Revolution. And, it's becoming a money pit. Right around now, building new makes a lot of economic sense. Absolutely. I would say that, how do you define sort of a successful region from an economic development perspective, and how does Indiana stack up? I mean, for us, they're places that are home to sort of a significant base of what Brookings Institution has called advanced industries and traded sectors that export products. Indiana scores very highly on that because you have such a robust manufacturing sector. They understand their core competencies in terms of research and development and innovation, and they organize around advancing those core competencies. Again, Central Indiana scores very well on that, and I think CICP plays a very important role in that. You have initiatives advancing agricultural biosciences, advanced manufacturing, innovation and IT and associated tech sectors. So you score well there, and actually CICP is very well regarded in economic development circles from competing regions around the country. Successful places are places that develop, attract, and retain talented, innovative people. And we talked about that in this presentation in terms of the sort of output of talent taking place. Making sure that you're a diverse and welcoming community matters greatly for attracting the top talent that's needed in these industries, which often have to come internationally to meet the demands that we have. They also invest in retraining and reskilling and invest in the people that you have. And I think Indiana and Ascend and the state of Indiana through workforce development do that. They pay attention to equity and social inclusion. As I mentioned, I think the healthcare sector in particular is a very heavy contributor to that. Academic medical centers tend to be urban institutions and have very diverse workforce and contribute that way. They're entrepreneurial and open to new ideas and new opportunities, and they make sure they've built an ecosystem that supports entrepreneurs with capital access, with entrepreneurial training. And they're collaborative and networked. And I think we find that's increasingly important, that those regions that folks are not talking to each other, that CEOs are not connected to each other, they just don't fire on all cylinders. But Central Indiana is really good on that. And finally, they sort of invest in themselves and they look to the future and the way environments are emerging and invest in building those environments to meet the needs of the future workforce and the needs of the community. Patty, you mentioned 16 Tech. I mean, that's a great example, the innovation district movement. We're doing a lot of consulting around the country and around the world related to innovation districts. And you're very much part of that movement. So Indiana compares very favorably. I mean, you're not alone. As Anne would know, Memphis does a lot of work in medical devices, and it's a good competitor in that space. There's new technologies coming that are a challenge in terms of regenerative medicine, that replacing worn out organs with tissue rather than a medical device. These are all things, but they're things that you're adapting to and doing research in. So I think Indiana compares very favorably and is as good as it gets when it comes to life sciences advancement in particular.
Well, I appreciate that, Simon, but I'm not going to let you off the hook. So thank you. If there's one thing you would want to say to everyone here, including our friend Dave Roberts, who has the ear of the governor and the Secretary of Commerce, what's the opportunity?
It's paying attention to disruptive technologies and working to build collaborations between companies across sectors. So what do I mean by that? It's making sure your IT and advanced analytics capabilities are connected to your life sciences companies, so you work off both those strengths together. It's your medical device companies working with your biological companies to be ready for that regenerative medicine. future. It's leveraging your public health strengths at Regenstrief Institute and data analytics to address the opportunities that are coming in and changing base of healthcare from personalized medicine and wellness. It's the digital revolution in healthcare. It was great to hear Dr. Nagy talk about taking care of people in their home. Leveraging those digital capabilities to do home health, virtual patient care visits. A lot of that's accelerated under COVID, and you know, it's been one of the actual benefits of COVID is it's accelerated advanced technology in healthcare. But yeah, there's a lot to pay attention to in the future. No shortages of threats, but a much wider landscape of opportunities.
Thank you very much, Simon. I appreciate it. So we've got some questions coming in on the chat, but I'm going to toss it back at the panel first to say, what do you think is missing? I'm going to start with Dr. Nagy. Dr. Nagy, you're in the depths of this, and I know you're focused on patient care. If there's one thing you'd like this audience to hear about where you think we could do better, what would it be?
Well, what's front and center right now is workforce, what we would call, anybody would say staffing, and it's across the board. And quite frankly, where we're best at is in the highest educational job codes. Just given the relationships and everything that we saw in this report, we do very well there. And when I say we, I'm using the IU Health we. Where we're experiencing difficulties, and we're not alone, this is across the nation, is the pipeline for talent that populate medical centers, labs, technical sites. I'm sure everybody's going through that. And it's clear to me that the strategies of the past will not yield what we need to have into the future. I don't have the playbook or the answer, but we all need to be asking those very difficult questions right now. And it's ones in which many of this is a positive. Right now, many have many options from which they want to choose and how they want to work. So let's take advantage of that and reimagine how our workplaces interact with that, as opposed to trying to fit somebody into how our company works. That's my take and my advice on that topic.
I appreciate that. I'm going to go over to the chat feature. We have a question from Bill Gormley. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Bill, I hate to deflect this, but I'm going to make a comment and then ask Dave Roberts if he has a suggestion. But we have an organization within the CICP family called Connexus, and Connexus is really focused on advanced manufacturing and logistics. We have a new leader of that group, and I'm sure Fred would love to hear from you, but it's not in my job jar, so to speak, to really respond to it intelligently. But I'm going to ask Dave if he has any observation of what the state's willing to do in high-speed logistics.
Well, so high-speed logistics applies across the board to a lot of items, but none probably more so than critical pharmaceuticals that need to be in a temperature controlled or highly controlled environment or delivered in a time frame because of whatever decay function is in place. I would say I see some green shoots already in terms of cold storage, and I think if you're watching some economic development announcements, you're seeing more and more of those. But as you start to imagine like the art of the possible, I think we do have a really interesting moment where we Indiana clearly had a lot of influence in the last administration, but in this administration, I think we have the position that Pete Buttigieg is in right now, combined with an administration that's very interested in investing in infrastructure. Clearly, I think is a altogether different dynamic than we had a year ago or over the last 4 years. But you can start to think about extensive charging infrastructure. I'm sorry.
You've got a frog in your throat.
And it won't go away. But, and it's not COVID, I'm sure of that. I feel like you need to clarify every time with that nowadays. but no, you can think about a robust charging infrastructure, which facilitates ultimately some autonomous transportation realities. So now, when we move outside of that kind of physical traditional highway infrastructure, you can talk about drone delivery systems and air, sort of air access to airfields and so on. FedEx here locally is number 2, but growing into the number 1 largest FedEx facility in the US over the next few years. So I think we'll see some interesting opportunities with that. But ultimately, when we're looking at the amount of dollars that are coming in from the federal government to invest across the board in nearly everything, but especially in infrastructure, I think we need to be placing smart bets that are going to create infrastructure that can persevere over the next 20, 30 years and actually be catalysts for growth, as opposed to just repaving roads. That's my opinion. And I think it would have a high degree of impact in certain areas that touch life sciences and healthcare.
Of course, that excludes the road that I drive to the office in every day that sorely needs to be repaved. I'm teasing. So
just to add to that a little bit, Patty, I'd note that, one of the advantages you have on the logistics front, with FedEx being there is already paying off in terms of, you've had some recent investments around radio pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. So obviously, radioactive materials used in life sciences that have a half-life and have to be delivered very rapidly to market. There's not many places that can do that. And you've got the physics skills to work in radiopharmaceuticals, the life sciences skills, and the logistics skills in Central Indiana. So it's an important new sector that you're starting to get some great wins for the state in.
Thank you, Simon. And I was going to mention that there was an IBJ article a month or so ago highlighting what's happening in the radioligand sector here in the state. And it depends on high-speed logistics. So we're excited about that. Nora, there's a question here about expanding media and communications capabilities. And then the second part of that is what do we need to do or to attract more cross-state and international talent and capital? I'd like to have you talk a little bit about capital. And do we have enough? Do we not? What are we missing? There's a lot of money out there. Money finds good science. What's your take on what's really available and what we need to do to expand?
Well, I think, when you ever ask anyone if there are enough resources, the answer is always no, right? There can always be more resources. And I think when you talk about it on a macro level, that's not as powerful as when you're talking about your own situation. So there are companies out there today that need money, and no matter what we say to that answer, it's not satisfying because it doesn't impact their particular situation. I think what we've found from even, it must be 10 to 15 years ago, at the end of the 2008, 2010, there was a real contraction in the number of venture capital firms. You lost a lot of the regional firms and they just got larger, especially in life sciences. And I think what that did is, instead of having to be the best idea in the Midwest, you need to be the best thing someone's seen in the nation, and not even in the nation, but sometimes globally. And I think that can be a sort of a unique perspective. And so it gets harder and harder to stand out when you have such a large field, but we do it. What I think has been an impact of that has been hard is if you're not already part of that network, it can be really hard to break in. Because what you end up having is people, it's all risky. And so if you have the opportunity to control even one component of that risk, and that's working with a team that you worked before, you're going to take it. And I think that's been a thing that has been a struggle for a lot of companies or technologies as they're coming out and trying to get started, is if you're not already part of that network, it's really hard to break in. And so what we found, one part to be helpful and effective of that is building those relationships, making those connections with mentoring, having those involvement in boards and scientific advisory boards, and also with management. But a lot of it has to do with getting that experience and almost, paying dues or having the opportunity to work in an environment and sort of build that reputation. And where that can be especially challenging for life sciences is it takes a really darn long time to get from an idea and an innovation in a highly regulated environment to having a proven therapy or a successful exit. And so it's a challenge, but we're doing it. It's not at a pace that everyone would like and is necessarily satisfying, but we are making progress. And I think that's component. And so what BioCrossroads does, what our universities do, and really, I think it's a testament to the kind of people that we are in the state. People want to give back, and they mentor and they make connections. And so it really is sort of that hard and necessary work of engagement and making connections and really, paying it forward. So that's what we're trying to do.
I think we are in a unique position there. So we're going to need to wrap it up. I just want to highlight, if you're an IBJ subscriber, there will be an article coming out about noon today, speaking directly to Simon's point of making sure that we're connecting industry and academia when it relates to data analytics and science. So stay tuned for that. And I'm going to hand it over for wrap with Lori.
Thanks, Patty, and thanks to all of our speakers today. It was a phenomenal discussion. I just wanted to make a plug for our annual Indiana Life Sciences Summit, which is coming up on Wednesday, October 13th. We have a fantastic group of thought leaders that are going to join us. We've got really what the focus of it is sort of what have we learned over the last 18 months. It's been an unusual and evolving environment, and some things have worked really well, and I think we'll continue to focus and change within our industry. So we're really focused on inclusion and collaboration in particular. And we've got Dr. Frida Lewis Hall, who's a former chief medical officer at Pfizer, is going to be our opening keynote speaker. We have Dr. Peter Kim from NIH, who's going to join us and tell us about how they shifted their efforts to getting COVID therapeutics on the market quickly. Dr. Anthony Philippakis from the Broad Institute is going to join us. And then from some of our local thought leaders, we've got Dennis Murphy from IU Health, Dr. Richard DeMarchi from IU and the chemistry department and all of his wonderful entrepreneurial enterprises that he's done. Dr. Virginia Kane is going to join us as well. We'll also have representatives from each of our research universities joining us, as well as many of our large and small companies throughout the state. So I really encourage you to go on and register. It's about a 3-hour program, and we're really looking forward to it and hope you can join us. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend. We hope to see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.